There are certain illustrations that the Apostle Paul uses quite often in his letters. The human body is one of these, and running in a race is another one. Paul uses them because just about everyone understands the concept behind them. They have great explanatory power, and it's always important that explanations do actually explain. Now we're going to read one of these illustrations and what it teaches from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 to 27. Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? So run that ye may obtain. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I not as one that beateth the air, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Only a short distance from the city of Corinth was the location where the Isthmian Games were held in ancient Greece. These games had been organised by Corinth until Corinth was destroyed in 146 BC. Then they resumed again after Corinth was rebuilt and had been moved back to the previous location close to Corinth just about 14 years before Paul visited the city. They were an important part of Corinthian life, so whenever Paul wrote, "They which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize," in verse 24, they all knew what he was talking about. As Paul comes to the end of the chapter, he makes a final point in respect of Christian liberty. You need to run the race, recognizing that you will be best served in the race if you do not allow your liberty to deflect you from the goal. And the goal, of course, is that I might by all means save some, as he writes in verse 22. The goal is to behave always in a way that furthers the gospel, and that is why Paul made himself servant of all. Now, the first point that Paul makes is that we need to run with distinction in the race. To win the prize, so run that ye may obtain, he says in verse 24, or run in such a way as to win. In a regular race, the prize is not guaranteed to everyone. One receiveth the prize, verse 24. You have to excel in order to win. You need to rise above the ordinary or mundane. Paul exhorts the Corinthians to exercise their liberty in a way that would secure the prize. So in order to excel, there is a need for discipline in the race. To excel, you must be careful how you behave in every area of life. You need to be temperate in all things, verse 25. That is self-controlled. A person who has their eye on the gold medal will run or will train in such a way as to prepare for the race. Things that an ordinary person might feel free to do, they will sacrifice in order to win the prize. Now, being disciplined means that we need to avoid distraction in the race. So run not as uncertainly, he writes in verse 26. We need to maintain an undeviating course, keeping in lane and not wandering all over the place, with a focus and purpose, not as one that beateth the air, Paul writes in verse 26. Not like shadow boxing, failing to land blows on the appointment, which simply use up one's energy pointlessly. This race requires not self-indulgence, but sacrifice. Paul writes, I keep under my body and bring it into subjection in verse 27. And that is what should govern how I use my liberty, because I don't want to be disqualified in the race. Paul writes in verse 27, I myself should be a castaway. So here's the challenge. Do we use our liberty to indulge our own freedoms, or do we manage our liberty in such a way that I am not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved? That's how Paul concludes this subject in verse 33 of chapter 10. And it is a lesson that we all need to learn in relation to the liberty that God has brought us into.